But when the riots broke out in '68, and there were three of us on that court who were white, and everyone else was African American, and the riots were boiling over, and they came up to the outside basketball court, and they saw the three of us, and the three of us looked at each other and said, "Oh, shit, it's over." And I never forgot this. Two things happened. My buddies were 6'8", 6'7", 6'6". They were the stars. And we were good friends. You know, went to each other's homes, which was huge for us in those days. Me getting to go to a black person's home was like, wow. Changed us, and them coming into my home and going, wow. It's like, this is in '68, and people, you realize this. A lot of my students don't. And these guys looked at a group of guys coming at us and said, don't even think of it. And literally probably saved our lives. And that was something in my, that, you know, it was all about basketball till that day. Then after that day, it was all about, wow, what the hell is going on? That was a key. So that's another blip on my circle. Another blip on my card, for example, was when I was doing my student teaching at college and my hair was about down to here. And my supervisor at the college told my supervisor at the high school, my cooperating teacher, you make sure this guy fits. He's a troublemaker, he's a freak, he's no good, we don't want him coming out of our program. I didn't know this. And my cooperating teacher, who was a strong Nixon supporter, and I was protesting the war, and all those things were going on in the late 60s and early 70s, finally told me in my last week, and he said, I told the university, if you don't get the A's I'm giving you, they won't have another student teacher come out of that university anywhere in this town. So I have this, that was a huge thing because I became a teacher. That hadn't happened, that would have never happened. And then the other blip in my story would be my marriage, 33 years, when I met my wife and my family. So those are just a little bit of my, so I'm giving you an example of what I want you to think about. My family is awesome. My wife is awesome. And have a girl, I can talk about that. Okay, what I want you to do right now individually, 4 pieces of your story, if you just note them. You don't have to write them down. Like I put basketball, fight at the playground, or however you want to describe it, student teaching, marriage. Those are the things I'd share as part of my story. What would you share as part of your story? Just 4 key places. Everybody good to go? Okay. Now, why? Do what you just did. Even though it may only be one other person in the class. Why do what you just did?
I think it comes back sort of to the choice thing that we talked about in terms of having something to be able to feel some degree of, I'll use the word success, because you can't do or say anything wrong with regards to your own experience because it's your experience. Nobody can validate it. So it gives you an opportunity to personalize it a little bit more, make it of interest to you, and have some degree of success.
You know, that's, if I could pause a minute, I'm sorry to interrupt the flow, but never thought of it that way. In all our work and choice and everything, let me stop and just say thank you for sharing that aspect of it with me.
I view it as an activity of making an inner connection with that person who you shared with. But they mentioned earlier about being a risk taker and sometimes how you have to take risks in order to be successful. I mean, when you walk, you go 1 foot on violence first, and to actually take steps forward. And I just shared some things with Mrs. Rouse that I never shared in a professional setting, and yet I feel good about it. You know, and they gave us that openness. It sort of lets you see behind eyes into the soul just a little bit.
Thank you.
I was listening to Rouse, and that was interesting to me. It just came up. The things that we talked about, the challenges that we overcame. Those, I mean, when he said they talked about yours, You know? And in those, you know, that's what makes you feel good. And then even on top of that, you got a celebration. We all had, even at the challenges, we picked out a celebration after the challenge. And that was what was kind of interesting. It was spiritual, but it was the celebration of what we had in the challenges of what we picked up on. You know, those things, I guess they make.
Here's my $5.
How about your drink? So in terms of culturally responsive teaching for social justice and equity, why? Let's elaborate on what you started with.
Connectedness?
Yeah. I think the connectedness is one piece. Let's go a little deeper into this. Why would you take time? Because I live in the real world. I know that principals, superintendents would say, what are you doing? They've got to pass the test. What do you have them share a story for? Is that story helping to get this paragraph written? Is that story helping? You know, I can just hear that. I can hear it loud and clear. So we have to be able to, I think, what I try to teach my teachers is, how do you answer that question? When a principal calls you into the office and says, I came by your class today, your kids were telling stories. What are you doing? You have to be able to, I think, what I try to teach my teachers is, how do you answer that question? When a principal calls you into the office and says, I came by your class today, your kids were telling stories. What are you doing? So everything you've been sharing is right on target, at least for my readings, in my understanding of why social justice is. But before we go any further with this, because I want to share with you the work of James A. Banks that I put up there a minute ago. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with James Banks, but he's brilliant. He's the leader in social justice and equity in my mind, and in culturally responsive teaching. And I don't know enough of him. I mean, I've done some reading, etc. And a lot of what we're doing right now is based on his work, so I encourage all of you to go to his website, and I'll put it up here in a minute. But in any event, I want to look at the other side, as we're doing in a good classroom. We do examples and non-examples. A non-example of what we just did is what goes on in most classrooms. We don't have time to find out who our students are and to find out what their story is. And yet, I think according to Banks, if I interpret him correctly, if we don't do that, we can't have a culturally responsive classroom. There's a lot of ways to do that. Now what I had to do, I want to give you one other example that I saw a teacher do that we write about in our book. But they're called passion posters. So you have every kid in the room do a passion poster. But in their passion poster, it's required that they not only do things they're passionate about, like it might be basketball, soccer, football, it might be a lot of sports things with middle school kids, but you have to put down something about your family. It's required. So what oftentimes this teacher said, so put down a cultural event in your family, and she clarified, and she said, look, cultural events don't have to be like St. Patrick's Day or St. Rocco's Day or these holidays or things she was mentioning in that, or Italians in that area. She said, it can be every Super Bowl Sunday the family gets together for a cookout and watches the Super Bowl. That's your culture, that's what you do. So these kids put these posters, and she put them all up across the top of the room. And they stayed there all year. And she would purposely, any time she could make a connection to one of the posters, she would say, well, it's just like James said over here. When his family got together for the football game, look what that means to, she was teaching some history lesson, and you could just see James go. She made sure everybody got their piece in the curriculum. That's just a start. But it shows that she cared about people's stories. And this teacher then, what she did, which we require our teachers to do, is she started going to community events. Ah, what a great idea. Okay? One of the most powerful ones of those that I can remember, this is just sort of like starting level of, this is not culturally responsive teaching in what I'm sharing. Just like a starting level. You talk about parent involvement. I had a young, white, Jewish teacher. Then remember, my school is mainly black, Hispanic, etc. And two of the girls in her class said, hey, why don't you come with us to church on Sunday, our Baptist church kind of thing. And she's like, she comes to me, she's like, should I go? I said, go? What do you think? Should I go? Was that overstepping? She literally says, is that overstepping my bounds as a teacher? If I go with these two 15-year-olds? I said, what are you talking about? I said, have you been arrested for child molestation or something? No. I said, well, are their parents okay with it? Yeah. So the story went like this. She comes back the next day. She says, I go to the church. She said, I'm the only white person there. I said, oh, okay. She said, they made me come up in front of the church and talk about Judaism. She said, so I got up in front of the church and I told them about my religion. She said, I got applauded. They all welcomed me. She said, I got hugs by the pastor. And she said, you know what, McDermott? That was the most religious experience I ever had. I said, you know what? Those kids and their parents are going to see you entirely differently from now on. You just made a connection. You couldn't have done a better job. What happened with those two girls all of a sudden is, hey, miss, good to see you today. Hey, can I get my homework in? I made a purpose to go to her classroom after that, after she got involved in the community center. Her connection with the parents, that was it. She had a connection. It's not that she's writing every phone call and all that sort of nonsense, but were parents really listen to her when she would call home? Her taking time to connect with her students in whether it's sharing her stories or then listening to stories and getting involved in the community.